I'm here to talk about pillar number one, moratorium on school privatization. Members of the civil rights community have expressed that charters are more segregated, they're underperforming, and they lack appropriate transparency and accountability to the public. As a result, in 2016, Journey for Justice led the way, and then NAACP and the Movement for Black Lives all called for a moratorium. A national conversation about charter schools is more important now than ever before. The NAACP's Task Force on High Quality Education found that 1 in every 8 black students now attends a charter school in the United States. Even though the popularity of charter schools has begun to go down in the public discourse and in many corners of our society, there's been a particularly rapid growth of charter schools over the last 10 years. That's owed to millions of dollars of federal tax dollars and state tax dollars, and millions more from the Billionaire Boys Club, the Gates, Broad, Arnold, the Walton Family Foundation. Considering the rapid growth of charter schools, it's important for public conversations about school choice to distinguish fact and truth from sloganeering and rhetoric. Yeah. Are charters more segregated than public schools? Now, we've started a conversation about this in the last 2 weeks, more than ever before, because the AP found that about 1 in 7 charter schools are 100% people of color, students of color. In addition to media reports, the predominance, and let me be your professor for just the next 3 minutes, okay, that's my day job. The predominance of peer-reviewed research examining local and national data on the segregation of students in charter schools over the past 10 years has demonstrated that school choice is exacerbating school segregation. The research has actually shown this for about 2 decades. For example, using 3 national data sets, one research study found that charter schools are more racially isolated than traditional neighborhood public schools in virtually every state and every large metropolitan area in the nation. Now, there are some naysayers. Researchers at Vanderbilt and Mathematica have argued that charters are, quote, not creating greater segregation. But even if you look at their data, their own data shows that white and African American students were more likely to go to even more homogeneous charter schools, even more segregated than their neighborhood public schools. But the question is, why are charters segregated? The school reformers have been saying, well, it's because charters sit within segregated neighborhoods. That's only part of it. One of the big problems is that parents are choosing schools that are less racially integrated than their neighborhood schools. But why? The peer-reviewed research has shown that whites are less likely to be interested in attending charter schools that have no excuses discipline and are test prep factories. Also, white parents want to have a say in their charter schools, and the research is showing that whites at about 75% have parents on boards in their primarily white schools, and in black schools only 25% of charters have parents on their board. So in sum, the peer-reviewed research has demonstrated that the purposeful choice of African American and white families based on a variety of criteria are creating these more homogeneous schools. So what about the argument that charters perform better? You've heard this before. A prominent study found that choice was bad for achievement on average, as relatively large negative effects of charter schools on the achievement of African American students is driven by students who transfer into charter schools that are more racially isolated than the schools they have left. So that's a peer-reviewed work. But folks really like to talk about credo. How many of you have heard of credo? How many have had credo waved in front of you and saying, charter schools are great because of credo? Credo is research produced at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, which is a conservative-leaning think tank. But if you actually look at the credo results, now let me be the stats professor for just a minute, it shows that in 93% of measurements in reading and math in large cities across the United States, let me repeat that, in 93% of measures in reading and math across the United States, charters, after 25 years, still have a negative impact on black students. In cases where charters perform better, the difference is typically minuscule. It's like comparing the Cleveland Browns and the 49ers. It's like comparing teams that are 1-10 and 0-11. the magnitude of difference is very small. Yes, the 49ers are a little bit better than the Browns, but is that something to write home about? Apologize if there's Browns or 49ers fans in the room. In some cases where charters perform better overall, they'll say, well, charters perform 42 days better, etc. Like in Philadelphia, we often hear this. If you look at the actual data, it turns out that white and Asian students are doing great in the schools, where Latinos and African Americans still have a negative achievement in charter schools. So the primarily positive impact comes from white and Asian students in charter schools, not from Latino and African American students in those schools. And I know that there's folks that are watching this and they're going to fact check me on Twitter, so you better come strong because I've got the data. Furthermore, it's very clear that after more than 25 years of trying, charters have failed to dramatically change the status quo of inequality that the previous panelist talked about. However, where they are succeeding is putting our democratically controlled schools on a path to bankruptcy. The research is showing that LA, Chicago, Oakland, there's million-dollar shortfalls. The school Backpacks for Cash talks about how Philadelphia has struggled because 1/3 of their students are now in charter schools. In conclusion, our society has spent hundreds of millions of dollars building, financing, and funding charter schools at great expense to taxpayers. But considering the research evidence to this point, the underwhelming results of charter schools, and you could toss vouchers in there too, and in many cases reprehensible and illegal behavior by charter school and voucher school operators, school choice and privatization should be considered a national disgrace and disappointment. We have truth. We will win. Thank you.